sometimes we'll make a commitment when we're in the excitement of the moment and say, okay, I'm going to write 10 hours a week. But then you realize that 10 hours is the only free time you have all week. Are you really going to dedicate all that time to writing? And maybe we need to pare that down to 5 or 3 hours a week. What are you seriously going to do?
Hello, fellow creative voyagers. This week on the Indy Author podcast, I talk with Dre Baldwin about the discipline-driven path to success, including the importance of having clear goals to maintain focus, the role of discipline, time management, execution, and planning in achieving goals, the value of seeking external perspectives, and of sharing your goals only with those who can provide support to achieve them, and practical tips for overcoming writer's block. And now let's hear from Dre Baldwin about the discipline-driven path to success. Hello, and welcome to the Indy Author podcast. Today, my guest is Dre Baldwin. Hey, Dre, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Matty. Excited to be here. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm very excited to have you here as well. And to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of background on you, Dre Baldwin is the CEO and founder of Work on Your Game Incorporated. He has given 4 TEDx Talks and has authored 35 books. Dre's content has been consumed over 103 million times. His daily Work on Your Game MasterClass has amassed over 3,100 episodes and over 7.3 million listeners. Dre had a 9-year professional basketball career playing in 8 countries. And Dre's framework is the roadmap in reverse for professional high performance, consistency, and results. And I first became aware of Dre when I was listening to Mark Lefebvre's Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. And Dre was in episode 379, Simplify Your Life and Work with Dre Baldwin. And I'll include a link to that in the show notes. And a lot of that was focused on mindset, keys to successful mindset for creativity and productivity. But Dre, I know that one sort of theme you came back to a lot was goal setting. So the goal setting was sort of foundational to some of these other mindset-related things you talked about with Mark. And so I thought, what would be more fun than having you on the Indy Author podcast to talk specifically about goal setting? And so I wanted to start out with a question because here we are. We're recording this interview at the end of November. This will go out probably like end of December, beginning of January, a time when I think a lot of people are thinking about goal setting. And I just wanted to ask you, what do you think about those sort of chronologically driven goal setting times, like at end of year as we're going into the beginning of a new year? Like, is the timing of this fortuitous or is the timing of this just coincidental?
Well, I think it's always a good thing to set goals, whether you're setting them on the 15th of the month or the 31st. I think it's always good to set goals because a goal simply gives you a target to aim at. My background is in sports, Matty, and in the sports world, as they say, if you don't have a goal, you can't score. So if there's no basket, you shoot the ball, there's nowhere for it to go. You're playing soccer, yet you're trying to kick the ball into the net. So having a goal just gives you a target. And when you have a target to aim at, that helps focus. And focus is a force multiplier. When we are focused on a thing, we tend to do better at it because we know exactly what we're doing as opposed to having our attention diverted amongst multiple things. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of this debunked concept of multitasking, which is really just task switching. Because every time we switch our focus from one thing to another, we have to kind of rev the focus up again. But the longer and stronger we stay focused on anything, the better we do at it, regardless of our baseline skill level. So what a goal does is give us something to focus on, and that gives us the best chance of getting the best out of ourselves when we have a singular thing or a clear target that we're focused on. It doesn't mean you can only have one goal. You can have as many goals as you want, but when they're clear and they're clearly articulated, at least we know where we're trying to go. Doesn't mean you always get there, but at least you know what you're attempting to do.
One of the things that I think would be quite different between goals in sports and goals in a creative life is that, as you're saying, that the goal is quite clear, the basket or the net. Whereas I think that sometimes in other parts of our life, the goal isn't as clear. So one of the things I sometimes wrestle with is, let's say I have a goal that I'm going to put out another nonfiction book in the first quarter of next year, which seems like, it complies with most of those SMART goal sort of guidelines that we probably have all heard about. But what if I peeled back the onion of that goal, I found that what I was really looking for was to offer something to my fellow creators that would both provide value for them and provide an additional stream of income for me? Like, how carefully should one analyze the goal that pops into one's head before pursuing it in some of the ways we're going to be talking about in a minute?
So your question is, how carefully should someone analyze the goal before going after it?
Yeah. And what are the pros and cons of just saying, oh, a book in the first quarter of next year, that sounds like a good goal, I'm going for that. Or taking the step back and saying, is that really what I'm going for? Which I can imagine could have its benefits, but could lead to analysis paralysis.
Okay, fair enough. And yes, you should ask yourself, is that really what I'm going for? Because you don't want to set a goal and then achieve it and then say, well, I still feel unfulfilled or unhappy or unaccomplished because I wanted to achieve this thing. It wasn't what I really wanted. So one of the things that I tell people about setting goals is that generally you should keep your goals to yourself because your goals are generally very personal. And the reason why you want to reach the goal is not anybody else's business unless they happen to be involved in helping you reach the goal. So if I have a goal as an athlete, for example, to get in a certain type of shape, then I can tell my trainer what the goal is and the reason because the trainer is going to help me. Or if I'm an author and I have an author coach, I may tell my author coach why I want them to help me get this book done because of this, this, and this. These are the things that they're going to do for me. But anyone outside of that doesn't need to know about my goals because they can't do anything but hinder my process or get in my way. Maybe they'll ask me, how's it going? But how many times do you want to be asked that same question? Right? I just want to focus on what I want to do and stay focused on it. So you should ask yourself, why do you want to achieve it? Because when you get clear on the why, Matty, that's more of an emotional driver. The real reason why you want to achieve a thing, you have to get past the logical levels of answers, which usually is the first maybe 3 or 4 answers we give to any why is logical. And then we start getting to the emotional level. The emotion is like the gas pedal. And what I tell people is that emotions are great gas pedals. They're terrible steering wheels. You should not allow your emotions to determine where you go. But once you have logically and rationally decided what you want to do, you want to figure out the emotion behind that what, because that is the why. And the why is the gas pedal that allows you to actually move forward. It gives you the fuel to the fire, so to speak, that'll keep you moving forward towards the next thing that you want to do. So to answer your question, yes, you should ask yourself, why do I want to achieve a thing? Because that's going to be the driver that keeps you going, even when it may not be so easy.
That's really interesting what you're saying about only share your goals with the people whose help you need, because I think a lot of, in a lot of authors communities, there's a lot of talk about having accountability partners and things like that. And those are not necessarily the people who are providing anything other than emotional support or giving you a pat on the back or a thumbs up or whatever, or asking that question about how's it going. So extrapolating from what you said, are you saying that you should always look to the person who can practically help you reach the goal if you're looking for some form of accountability partnership, as opposed to just an arbitrary person who's going to provide you with emotional support?
I think an accountability partner is fine if you are intentional and they are intentional about that's their role. Mm-hmm. So if I tell someone, hey, I'm going to write 500 words a day for the next month, then my accountability partner should know about that because they have the leverage and they have my respect to hold me accountable. Okay, did you write your 500 words? So I haven't talked to you in 3 days. That means you should have 1,500 more words than you had since the last time we spoke. So if they're involved, because that's involvement. If you're holding me accountable to do the thing that I say I want to do, then you're involved in me reaching the goal. Now, if you're just a spectator, then you don't need to know my goal because the only thing you can do is get in my way. You can find out about the goal after I achieve it and you can help me celebrate, but you don't need to know about it while I'm in the process. As they say, nobody was looking in on the Sistine Chapel when Michelangelo was painting. They waited till it was done. All right. So everybody else has to stay out of the way.
Very interesting. I like that perspective. So now that I have a better sense of the goal setting, deciding what one's goal is, you had sent some of the characteristics that you think are especially important when it comes to pursuing the goal. And the first one was discipline. And I would love to hear what you have to say about discipline.
Foundation of professionalism is discipline. Right? Some people may call it, underneath the heading of discipline, you get consistency, you get persistence, you get preparation. Any professional is going to be disciplined at the thing in which they are a professional because you have no choice. By definition, a professional is someone who does something as their main paid occupation. And anyone who already is a professional has no choice but to be disciplined because there will be times that you are not motivated. You don't feel like doing that thing, but being that you're doing it as your main paid occupation, there'll be times you have to do the job, even though you don't feel like doing the job. Because again, that's what a professional is. Now, an amateur has the luxury of not working when they don't feel like it. A professional does not have that luxury because again, you're taking payment from somebody. And usually when people pay for things, they expect something in exchange, in my experience. So discipline is the driving force that keeps someone showing up and doing their job, regardless of what's happening on the outside, regardless of what's happening on the inside, regardless of whether it's going great, whether it's going terrible. You have to just consistently show up. And also discipline is a key differentiating skill because so few people have discipline, even though everyone understands the value of having it. So few people have it that if you have it, you basically separate yourself from a whole lot of people just by the simple law of contrast.
Yeah, I can imagine that I have traditionally published authors who have a schedule. They have to deliver their manuscript to the publisher on such and such a date. And independently published authors obviously don't have quite that same outside motivator. They have their internal motivator. They may not be relying on their work yet for their living. They're doing it on the weekends, with another job. So are there different approaches that, let's say, an indie author who's still working a day job is going to take in order to enforce some discipline around their work?
It's a great question. And I say no, there's not. Because even if you're an indie author, let's say you're a lawyer full time, but you're writing on the side and you can only dedicate 10 hours a week to writing, then you better be putting in those 10 hours in writing. That is a discipline right there. And if you want to be consistent in what your books produce, even as an on the side author, let's say you want your books to make you $100 a month, then you have to produce consistently if you want the money to come in consistently. This is just how it works. It's the law of the universe. You had to give what you want to get. Right? There's a balance out. So, and then you contrast that with someone who is a full-time author. They make all of their money from writing. They may have more time to give to the writing, but the consistency of the process is exactly the same. So whether you have 10 hours a week or you have 80 hours a week, you still need to be consistent in giving the time that you need to give to the thing that you're looking to achieve. So the answer is no, there isn't a difference. The only difference is in the volume, but the process itself is not different.
Yeah, I would think from a goal setting point of view, someone who's working a law job full time shouldn't be comparing their output to somebody who's doing the writing full time.
No.
When you think about I think that the A and the R in SMART is achievable and realistic or something like that. And making sure that, you're not setting goals for yourself that are based on an unfair baseline. If you're comparing yourself to someone who has more time or more resources to accomplish something, then you're not setting yourself up for success in that case.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And making sure that whatever goal you are going to set needs to be based on what you are actually willing to do. And maybe not even what you have the potential to do, but are you willing to give 10 hours a week to sitting down and writing around the kids or around family or around all the other leisure activities that you want to do? What are you seriously willing to commit to doing? Because sometimes we'll make a commitment when we're in the excitement of the moment and say, okay, I'm going to write 10 hours a week. But then you realize that 10 hours is the only free time you have all week. Are you really going to dedicate all that time to writing? And maybe we need to pare that down to 5 or 3 hours a week. What are you seriously going to do? And usually you find that out as soon as your plans meet with reality. As they say, real life usually alters the lab test.
Yeah, I like that idea both of looking forward to set your goals and also looking backwards to see what is actually happening, because one of both the most painful and easiest concerns to address when I'm talking with writers, I'm talking with people in a writing environment, a writer environment, and they'll say, I don't know if I can really call myself a writer. And I was like, this is going to be super easy. Are you writing? Yes, you're a writer.
Yeah,
Are you writing? No, you're not a writer. Like it's very cut and dry. And so I think that if people are saying, oh, I have a goal of being a writer, and then they look back at their history and they're doing no writing, then it's probably time to maybe they should be painting, maybe they should be sculpting, maybe they should be taking up gardening, maybe there's some other outlet for their creativity and they've just picked the wrong goal for some reason.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're doing the thing, then you are the thing. You can call yourself the thing as soon as you start doing it. As soon as you stop, you're not that anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think you've done a nice entree to the next characteristic of pursuing a goal, which is time management. We were talking about what can you accomplish if you have 10 hours a week versus 80 hours a week. Talk a little bit about time management.
Sure. So time management is actually a misnomer because no such thing as managing time. I mean, time goes at the exact same pace no matter what we do. You work really hard, time goes, an hour is still an hour. And if you do absolutely nothing, an hour is still an hour. So when people talk about time management, I get what they mean. I'll get to that in a second, but there's no such thing as managing time. And there's a reason why people call it time management, because it makes it seem like it's some outside external force that we need to get control over. When what we actually mean when we say time management is self-accountability and self-control. That's really what we need to manage. We need to manage ourselves because, again, 24 hours is 24 hours no matter what you do. It's what we do in the 24 hours that makes all the difference. So there's no, again, managing the time is managing ourselves and holding ourselves accountable to doing what we said we were going to do between 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock. And between 11 o'clock and 12:30, it's, again, the time is always going to be the time. What did you do in that time is really the management. That's really the accountability. So for anyone to get more done over the course of a day, the first thing we need to do is acknowledge and respect the fact that time is going And then we just need to do a better job of, well, let's say the best way I would describe this is keeping track of our time, how we're using that time, what we need to get done within a certain time frame, and then holding ourselves accountable to it. So it's two pieces to it. It's what time frame do I have to get this done, and how much do I need to get done in this time frame? Often people will only do one or the other. They'll say, well, I need to get all these things done, and I'll take as long as it needs to take. Problem with that is eventually you run out of time. Or they'll say, I have this much time to get things done, and I'll get done as much as I can get done. Problem with this is too many things get left undone, and now you have this backlog of things that you never finish. So the accountability is about having both. I need to get all of these things done completely, and I only have this much time to get it done. Now, when people hear something like that, they may think, well, Dre, that kind of sounds like a deadline, and it may create a good amount of pressure on me, and it may even induce stress within me or put stress upon me. And I say, exactly. That's exactly what it's supposed to do, because pressure and stress move people to action. No one has ever been under pressure and stress. And actually, sometimes people get under pressure and stress and they quit and they curl up in a ball and do nothing. But for the most part, when you put yourself under pressure and stress of something that has to be done, usually you go do something. You find some way to make that thing happen. So pressure and stress are not negative things. They're actually good things. It's just a matter of how you choose to frame the pressure and stress that you are voluntarily putting yourself under when you start, quote unquote, managing time. But it's not really managing time. It's really managing yourself.
Yeah, that makes me think of two things. One is that maybe the unproductive pressure is when people have chosen things that are unrealistic or unachievable as their goal, and making sure you've picked a goal that is just like right outside the bounds of comfort. Like if it's maybe within the bounds of comfort, you're not time-wise or scope-wise or whatever, you're not tapping into that productive pressure. And the other thing it made me think of is that in my own way of organizing my time, I have a task list, but at the beginning of every day, I have the big chunks of work I have to do. Like there's the work I do for the Alliance of Independent Authors. There's my own writing work. There's book formatting I do for people, the podcast, the 5, 6, 7, 8 big chunky thing. And so each day I'll say, okay, today I'm working on this. Today I'm working on that. But I'm thinking that from a goal setting point of view, maybe a more productive way of approaching that is to say, my top goal is community building, or my top goal is a creative output, or my top goal is an income earning thing, and assess things that way. It's kind of back to that, peeling back the onion, that I might have behind some of those more tasky sort of goals, I have an underlying goal of community building, or I have an underlying goal of income earning. You can tell I've been thinking about this because I'm coming up on doing my planning for the next quarter. And so, at what level is it good to frame up how you want to be allocating your time and energy?
Okay, I think I'm understanding your question.
Okay.
Is that you can make the systems and the goals work together, because it can be a combination of both. So if my goal is, for example, I want to complete a book, I want to start the book and finish it in the next 90 days, then that's the goal, is the book is going to be done 90 days from now. The system is I need to then write 1,000 words a day between now and over the next 6 weeks. I need to write 1,000 words a day. Then the next step of the system is I have to get the cover design. Next step is the editing is happening. Next step is I'm recording an audio book. Next step is putting together the sales funnel. Next step is send things back for revisions, whatever, the back and forth editing process or design process. So the systems can contribute to the goal. Is that along the direction of what you're asking?
Yeah, I think that what you're illustrating is that the things that I was describing as two perspectives is the concrete goal versus the outcome of that. So if my goal is to put out another nonfiction book in first quarter of next year, then the result of that could be additional income or community building. But that's kind of the follow-on. And so I think in the framework you're describing, your recommendation is focus on that thing with an understanding of what you're going to get as the outcome of that thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think it's actually three pieces. So you have the goals in the middle, right? The byproduct of the goal is over on this side to the right of it. And then the system that leads to reaching the goal is to the left of it. So the system leads to the goal, and the goal leads to the byproduct. So if the goal is I want to write a book and have it out, the system is all the steps necessary that you have to follow consistently in order for the book to come out. And then the community and the money are the byproducts of the book actually being finished. So there's actually, I see three pieces there: system, goal, byproduct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a great entree to one of the other things that you recommend in terms of goal setting and achieving your goals is execution. So talk a little bit about execution.
Well, that's when the rubber meets the road. So we have these goals, we have these systems, all the things that need to happen. And execution is actually getting out there and doing it, sitting down and blocking all time to actually write. Or we're supposed to be writing from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock. Okay, it's 1 o'clock. All right, put the timer on and actually sit there and write for the next hour. So that execution is doing the actual work that we told ourselves that we're going to do. And then if you can continuously do it, it starts to become a habit to the point that it's easier to keep doing it than it would be to not do it. And those habits eventually become a discipline. And that discipline, as long as we can maintain it, will again separate you from most of your peers, because most people simply are not disciplined. Everyone has goals. Many people have talents, and everybody has potential and ideas, but many of us never bring them to life simply because we don't have the discipline to stick to anything for long enough to make it work. So the execution is about having a plan of action, what needs to happen, and then just actually, literally executing on your plan on a consistent enough basis to see it through to whatever outcome gets produced. Maybe you don't even get the outcome that you thought you would. Maybe we just had to rethink the plan. But it's just putting it into use so that we can see what happened versus what didn't happen. That's the execution.
So with regard to execution, and this is something that having listened to you talk to Mark Lefebvre, I don't think this is an issue for you, but I'm sure that this is an issue for some of our listeners and viewers, and that is that people have an idea. Let's say that they're writing a fiction book and they have sort of the general idea of the plot. They have a good sense of their protagonist, et cetera, et cetera. And
Right.
so then they sit down, they're trying to be disciplined. They're sitting down at 7 p.m. and they've allocated an hour, and now their fingers are on the keyboard and they don't know what to do. So they've done everything they can think of to line themselves up to execute on achieving this goal, but now they're blocked. So do you have any advice to help people get past that challenge?
Yes, we call that doing your homework. So that's part of discipline. So doing your homework means setting yourself up so it's easier to do the thing when it comes time to do it. So in school, you did your homework. So ostensibly, the theory is you do your homework, you'll be better prepared for the quiz or the test, right? And it's the same thing in the sports world. You do your homework by practicing and training so that when you get into the game, you're ready to execute and do what you need to do. So we're talking about something like writing, the homework is setting yourself up so that you already have your headers and your subjects and your subheaders already in place, for example, so that when you sit down to write, you're not just looking at a blank page and a blinking cursor trying to figure out where to start. You can set yourself up with the start ahead of time. So when I write, for example, I'll just come up with the headers of every chapter that I want to write about. And then when it's time for me to write, I look at that header and I already know what I want to say about that, and I can just start writing. So I'm never looking at a blank screen trying to figure out what to say. Even when I write blog posts or articles, what I'll do is I'll get an idea of something I know I want to write. I'll title the document, whatever it's going to be about, and I'll put a few notes, maybe a sentence or two about what has led to this thought. And then I won't even write it right there on the spot. But then when it comes time for me to write, I can open 8 of those documents in back-to-back tabs, and I can just go one by one and write all 8 articles, because the notes that I left jog my memory about what I want to say, the story I want to tell, and the conclusion that I want to give. So this is all about doing your homework. So you don't want to just be looking at a blank page trying to figure out what to say. I've heard a writer say something like they would be writing, and Matty, what they would do is stop in the middle of the sentence, and they would stop their writing in the middle of the sentence. So then the next day when it's time to write again, all they have to do is just finish that sentence, and it already kind of jogs their memory as to where they want to go next.
Yeah. I've spoken to a podcast guest who used that approach as well. I wish I could remember who it was. I would give them credit for also having called that out.
Mm.
And I think that what you're describing is it's very clear how that executes in nonfiction, but I can say that I do something very similar for my fiction. The impetus was a little bit different, because with one of my novels, I found that I'd written whole 85,000 words or whatever, and then there was an issue, like a foundational issue with the antagonist's motivation. And so I ended up having to go back and undo and rewrite a lot of that novel. It was very inefficient. And so what I started doing was framing out the story so that I would do exactly what you're saying, except from a fictional point of view. My version of this would be Lizzie meets up with 2 of her allies and discusses the issue that they're facing. That's that's going to be a chapter eventually. And then the next one is Lizzie returns home to where she's living with her godfather and his housekeeper. That's all I would say for another chapter. And I would just keep going through and fleshing it out. And eventually I would just start writing the actual manuscript. I was doing it to avoid getting myself into that situation where I'd written myself into a hole and I didn't know how to get out of it. But I think it's the same thing. If you know that at some point in your novel, you're going to have a big shootout in the empty movie theater, then just write down big shootout in empty movie theater as a way of getting past the blank page, exactly as you're saying.
Exactly. Right. So just setting yourself up ahead of time, again, that's why I call it doing your homework. So you set yourself up ahead of time, so when it's time to write, you could even jump around. So let's say you have 10 chapters, you don't feel like writing the chapter 2 story right now, you can jump to chapter 4 or chapter 8 and you can write that part out because you already know what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I totally do that. I've said that to people and they can't imagine how I can jump around, but whatever works for you to get the story out or to get the information out on the page.
Exactly.
So the fourth item that you had sent regarding goal setting was planning.
And planning, what I tell people is that plans are useless, but planning is priceless. Why? Because, as I said earlier, that real life usually alters the lab tests. The way that we expect things to go is usually not exactly how it does go. But the time that we spend planning is time that we're putting our most valuable asset, which is our minds, to work, to consider how things are going to go. Even though we may not be perfect in predicting the future, the fact that we thought about the future usually puts us in a better space than if we just randomly do stuff and figure it out as we go along. For example, if you're packing for travel and you're going to be getting on a plane, you're better off writing down everything that you know you need to pack rather than just grabbing a suitcase and throwing everything you can identify that you need in the suitcase the day of the flight. If you write things down, you'll probably think of things that you otherwise would have forgotten if you just grabbed stuff and threw it in the suitcase. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the planning process just means thinking ahead about what might happen, what might maybe go wrong, the contingency plans that you need to have in place. And usually when we think ahead of time of a situation, we are much more prepared for what actually happens than if we didn't think ahead of time for the thing that we're going to do. So that's what the planning is about. All right, this is what we need to do. This is how it needs to look. Here are the steps that need to be taken. All right, here's how much time we have. Here are the resources we do have. Here are the resources that we don't have. How can we make it work given the situation in front of us? If you get out ahead of situations, in my experience, people who are out ahead of situations tend to do better than people who just figure it out as they go along. Even if you are very talented, even if you're very smart, even if you have a lot of resources, if you prepare ahead of time, you'll do better than if you don't.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that there could be like the reassessment, if you're doing this kind of, if you're sort of forward planning, but basing it on a reassessment, the packing example is perfect because I just got back from a 2-week trip. And I do have my list of things, Every year, my husband and I go to Maine. I have the list of things to go to Maine. And then when we get back from Maine, I think back and I say, you know what? Every year I've brought 2 bathing suits. I really don't need 2 bathing suits. I need 1 bathing suit. If my goal is packing efficiently, then now by looking back, I know I only need 1 bathing suit. And I think the same could be true if we extrapolate this to a writing career, that you could have your plan in place. I'm going to put out another nonfiction book in first quarter of next year, whatever, you executed on the discipline and time organization and execution aspects of it. And then looking back, because I think that the value there can be, every quarter, I think I'm going to put out a new nonfiction book. And every quarter, it's always late. Well, I could double down on discipline and time organization and execution to try to do that. Or I could just say, maybe a book a quarter isn't for me. Maybe I'm going to do a better job if I'm putting out a book, a nonfiction book twice a year. So it's like the retrospective planning and then how you carry that forward. Does that make sense? Or do you feel like that's kind of cheating on the goal setting, on adjusting the goal setting going forward in that way?
Well, it could be either one. So if someone wants to put out a book a quarter, then they should also ask themselves, why do I want to put out a book a quarter? Is it because you want to put out 100 books before you die? Is it because of a certain amount of money that you're going to make? What is it? What's the reason why you want to do it? Because if the reason is good enough, then the book won't be continually late. You won't be late every quarter. You'll actually put it out on time if the reason is strong enough. But if the reason is not strong enough, then you can, life can get in the way, slow you down, and you end up being late on every single book. So we had to find out what's the real reason why they want to do it. And that reason has to be strong enough that will move that person to action to actually execute it, assuming that it is, again, within their means as far as their ability to write, as far as their resources, as far as their time, can you actually do this if you followed the process as it's currently laid out? Because if someone only has 3 hours a week to write, but they need to write 85,000 words 4 times, okay, well, is that realistic? Can you write that fast? All right. That may not make sense given the resources that a person has. So it has to make sense. Can this actually happen given your current situation? And if not, we need to make some adjustments either to the goal or to the outcome of what's going to be produced. Maybe we could write a 30,000 word novel and you can do 4 a year, but 85,000 words probably not going to work with the amount of time that you have available. The other thing is, I like what you explained, how you would kind of look back, debrief on the situation and ask yourself, all right, given what I knew then, what should I have done differently? Not even based on new information, but just based on what you already know, what could we have done differently? So I don't know if you're familiar with Ray Dalio's book called Principles.
No.
But in that book, Ray Dalio, he's a finance guy. And the book is all about how he structured his company such that they are always doing a debriefing on every single project they go through. And they ask themselves the question, given what we knew before this project started, what did we miss? What did we overlook? Because we often ask ourselves the question, now that we went through it, what do we know? Of course, there's going to be new information when you get out and the rubber hits the road. But what did we miss given the information we had up front that we should have known and we should have known better? So similar to what you said with the bathing suit, that you already knew before you left that you only need 1, but you brought 2 anyway. See, that's what where you would kind of catch yourself and hold yourself accountable. I already knew that this was going to happen, but I did it anyway. And we have to catch ourselves there because human beings are creatures of habit. So we have to get conscious about the unconscious because habits are unconscious. We have to get conscious about our unconscious habits in order to have the power to do anything about them.
Yeah. Well, I think the fact that this will be coming out probably around the switch from one year to the next is good because I think it's a good moment both to look forward and look backwards and say, I'm looking back at my year and I'm seeing what I didn't accomplish, and I'm factoring that in as I'm making my plans for the next whatever period of time you like to plan for. And I think that the evil side of discipline can be people get so focused in on what they're doing that they never sort of come up for a breath of air and to look around and see if what they're doing is still productive. Do you have any general advice for how people should do that reassessment? You know, we've been talking about other examples like going on trips and bringing bathing suits, but do you have any specific examples you can share of a writer's life and how and how often they should be taking that step back and taking a look at their goals and reassessing them?
It's a great question. And I think one of the things you can do is get a fresh set of eyes on what you're doing. Talking to other people in maybe the same industry as you or people who are in other industries and letting them just ask you some questions, just some objective, non-expert questions about what you're doing and if it's actually taking you where you want it to take you. If you're writing, let's say you're putting out a whole bunch of books. Well, what's the reason why you're putting out all these books? Is it actually getting you to where you want to go? If you keep following this process, is it going to get you where you want to be within the time frame in which you want to be there? And sometimes that takes someone who's not in the space to see it because they have, again, fresh eyes. They don't know as much as you know about the industry. So someone just asking some objective, non-expert questions might lead to some insights and breakthroughs. So I'm a big fan of that. I have friends in the business world we're all in different industries, but we're all entrepreneurs. It's just figuring out by asking each other questions, hey, here's an insight that you wouldn't consider because you're deep in this industry. So you're thinking you have to do things this way, but have you looked at it from this angle that someone only who's from the outside could even see? So I am a fan of taking that step back and looking at things from the proverbial 10,000 foot view. I think the best way to do that is to maybe get some insights, which are usually in the form of questions that you can't answer from someone who's outside of that space. And that doesn't even necessarily have to be a person that you meet. It could be reading a blog post. It could be watching a YouTube video. Somebody may just present an idea that you're like, let me apply that to what I'm doing and see what I can do with it. I've done that many times in my career, just in business, taking an idea from one industry and applying it to a different industry. And those are where a lot of breakthroughs can come from.
Well, Dre, I think that is an unplanned but fantastic segue into me asking you to share where people can find out your offerings, like your YouTube channel and your blog. I want to thank you so much for talking about goal setting with me, and please let everyone know where they can go to find out more about you and everything you do online.
Sure. So I'm on all the social media platforms. You mentioned YouTube. So I have a lot of content on YouTube. every other social media platform that you use, I'm on it. Just look up my name, Dre Baldwin. I'm pretty easy to find. My screen names are different on every app, so I won't give you a screen name. Just look my name up. You'll find me. As far as overall what I do, our biggest focus right now is our university. It's called Work on Your Game University. And that's where we work with a very diverse range of entrepreneurs, whether that be just yesterday, we had a guy who's in the fitness world come in. We have a few fitness people. We have some moms, we have authors, we have speakers, we have coaches, we have food business, clothing business, finance business. And the main through line to all those people is we ask people, what do you like about working with us and working with Dre? Said, Dre, you're straight to the point, no fluff, no BS. You just get right to it. So if that's the type of person you like to work with or hear from, then I'm probably one of your people that you should look up. So that's all at workonyourgameuniversity.com.
Great. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dre. Have you set your goals for the new year? And if yes, did his insights lead you to reconsider or adjust any of them? I'd like to hear your thoughts. Just leave a comment on YouTube. And if you got value from the episode and were thinking, I wish I could buy Matty a cup of coffee, you can do that. Scroll to the bottom of any page at theindyauthor.com and click Buy Me a Coffee. Until next time, here's wishing you favorable winds and smooth sailing on your creative voyage.